What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Keep Klimbing podcast. Back here today with my man Brian French, and we're gonna go through the third segment of this, the role of ball flight analytics. The first one that we did was the kinematic sequence, and then we talked about mobility considerations. If you missed either one of those, definitely go check them back out. It's all equal pieces to the puzzle that fit all together to help build pitchers and help to throw baseballs better with more efficiency and better performance. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the role of ball flight analytics. And ball flight analytics, very simply, is just how the ball moves throughout the air from the time it leaves my fingertips and until the time it hits the catcher's mitt. And how we use some of those ball flight analytics, what they are, how they get applied in certain scenarios, and maybe, how they help us define pitches, whether they're good or not, whether they're going to be successful or not, in some of those details. So,
gotcha.
So as far as ball flight analytics goes, advanced ball flight analytics are really used to help people kind of fine tune their performance, and that's what we put into this blog post here. Fine tune it, meaning having data metrics to help us quantify if we predict that pitch is going to be successful or not, right? You guys probably are familiar with having TrackMan units, Rapsodo units. Those are the things that help us collect information, especially in bullpen settings. You can do them in live settings as well, but in bullpen settings, to help give us feedback on, is this pitch improving? Are these pitches going to be successful in the game? Because we do have analytics and studies to show, what pitches have a higher, percentage chance to be more successful in the game. So essentially, what we do is, if I could say it as simply, I just said it, before we started here, is if I could say it as simply as this, it's when the hitter's not in the box, able to give you feedback on if he can hit it or not. We have some of these analytics to help us suggest, predict if that pitch is going to be successful or not, right? Some of these metrics that you guys know and have probably heard of, things listed here are going to be like spin rates, velocities, movement profiles meaning like your horizontal break, your vertical break, things of that nature. Now, these ball flight analytics are basically just big time numbers to help us measure or quantify, the physics that take place as the ball's flying through the air, right? Like we've talked about seam orientation in the past. We've talked about a lot of different things, in the past about how the ball kind of flies through the air. And obviously the older the player gets, the better the player gets, the more the slight variation of grip or seam orientation really impacts the ball and really can impact the ball. I think at the younger ages, we're really still just trying to focus on, consistency and routines, overall athleticism, then start to get into like maybe some force production stuff. And can you command the strike zone? Can you throw the ball with enough force or enough velocity, to even get you into a progression basically that warrants conversations about your ball flight analytics, So I think that's probably one of the main pieces that, players, families, parents need to understand is that, this ball flight analytics conversation is on up the pyramid. It's on up the pyramid. I wouldn't say that it's, super applicable or important at the lower levels. It's probably not even super applicable as you get into like high school until you get into a realm where, you've checked those preliminary boxes where you move well, first and foremost. You have enough strength and stability.
This is long down the proverbial process.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, not to say that with our younger players, we aren't capturing some of the data, we aren't looking at some of the data. It's just not really a big piece of the conversation, I think, until you get older.
But to that point, if you can, and I think that's smart. You got a 12-year-old. That doesn't mean you can't track and start looking to see, does he have some of those things that as he grows, as his process grows, we can start talking and looking at, this is, identifying, for lack of a better way to put it.
Absolutely.
Identifying a pitcher, a kid that we believe has pitchability, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah. Amen. At the end of the day, for that 12-year-old player, there's probably just bigger buckets to fill. Right?
Sure.
Time is fixed. We don't have time, all the time in the world to be talking about all of the different things. We really need to be specific with our time and our thoughts and our intentions, that during this phase of your life, what's most important for us to focus on for you to take the biggest strides forward in this progression for you, right? So for those 12-year-old guys, none of our 12-year-olds, when they come through, will do any ball flight analytics.
Sure.
Not that it's bad, but it's just not something we prioritize for them.
Right.
By the time they get to a 14-year-old, though, they are probably getting a ton of feedback from our TrackMan units or different things like that. It's still probably just not very applied to the coaching cues, techniques, or things we want them to focus on, right? But yeah, I think at the end of the day, you still want to help track some of those things. And I think at the end of the day, you're trying to like measure and quantify some of those things. You'd like to see them overall like improve. At the end of the day, I would say though that this is like the tip of the spear for every single person or client that comes through pitcher that we serve. Is at the end of the day, we could do all these other things well that help improve ball flight analytics, but what everybody cares about is that their ball flight analytics get better. It's kind of the tip of the spear and what everybody wants. It's the outcome-based goals that we know every pitcher, whether they're 14 or 34, mind you. I know every single pitcher wants to come in, throw, we say better stuff, right? Throw harder, throw better moving sliders, whatever. Stuff kind of encompasses all of that. Better stuff, better strikes, better health and longevity. They want all three of those things no matter what.
Spin rate. You've got here a higher spin rate generates a rising fastball effect, making the pitch harder to hit. Now, does that matter at what velocity it's being thrown?
Yeah, I would say it's all relative. Typically, as velocity increases, spin rate increases.
Okay.
Right? So like give you a hypothetical example, a 2200 RPM fastball at 90 miles an hour is a very average spinning, major league average spinning fastball. Okay. 2200 RPMs at 80 miles an hour would be an extremely high spin 80 mile an hour fastball.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So we actually have a unit called Bauer units that takes like spin rate divided by velocity to help give you kind of it's some of the things that we help kind of quantify the heavy fastball that people have always kind of talked about. There's some things other than just that you would probably lump all into that. Some would be like induced vertical break and some of those different things. But those would be some of the data points that you would look at maybe to help quantify, like I said, like what a heavy fastball or a sinking fastball or some of those different things. But spin rate is a very good one to talk about and break down, because those things are getting like broadcasted and projected up on like ESPN and Fox and stuff these days, and that is such a incomplete look at a ball flight analytic that is probably getting some I don't even know what to call it, some like too much attention. Okay, too much attention that spin rate with like really low spin efficiency doesn't actually help produce movement. What spin rate does, it helps give a higher spin rate, right? So if I had a 3000 RPM fastball, that's super high, and I don't know that I've ever seen that, to be honest with you. So that's super hypothetical. Yeah. Call it 2600. That feels more reasonable, right? 2600 RPM fastball at 90 miles an hour, right? That just says or suggests how much movement potential the pitch has, okay? All of the other things that aren't necessarily all listed and broken down right here, talking about like tilt, like 12 o'clock on the clock, or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. Some of those, when I had the ball that last episode or 2 episodes ago, and we were talking about like how that ball spins. Hypothetically, if it had 2600 RPM spinning at 100% efficiency, meaning it doesn't wobble. Think about like if I had a hockey puck and I threw a hockey puck and it spun perfect end over end, right? It doesn't wobble back and forth. On that clock is going to really produce a really, effective induced vertical break. And the more it wobbles, or the more the clock gets tilted off of 12, right? The clock getting tilted off of 12 is going to take it more in a different direction. You kind of get, more guys that we would call ride run guys. You got ride guys, ride run guys, ride cut guys, right?
Gotcha.
So ride run guys is the guys that the tilt starts to get tilted to the side, right? And his release point basically is just like right over there. And then or you can have the spin efficiency be down from 100%, where it's like if you pictured like a Sharpie line over the ball, and it's just spinning as true as possible. It just looks like one continuous line. With a 70% guy, that thing's going to wobble as it comes through the air like that, right? So lower spin efficiency also doesn't, project the baseball into a better movement profile as it could, right? So spin rate on its own, as an analytic like that, broadcast up on the TV, really should just show or suggest how much movement potential a pitch has, not true movement.
I think the best graphic that I always look for, because you have the channel, ESPN, you're watching ESPN. ESPN2 has the show and all the graphics going on, right? Like you said.
Yep.
But the one to me is always the ball going with the flight with the different color trail behind it.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you really see, how hard it is to hit at the major league level, because you got the guy who can throw that baseball from the same arm slot, and all of a sudden the ball's like this, and then it goes pew, pew, pew. You're like, wait a minute, how am I supposed to hit that? And you're trying to figure that out, and people go, man, why did he swing at that? Get in the box, bro.
Yeah, it looked like a strike to about 48 feet, and then it was gone. And he just threw you two of those same pitches. Yeah, no doubt. So those ball flight analytics, basically, it's what we try to use and do to help people create, spins, velocities, and shapes like that, because, and first things first is getting the fastball dialed in. Right. And then even on your secondary pitches, it's, when you're building like an arsenal, or you're deciding which pitches to throw, okay, that when you do that, like getting a consistent shape and break is step number one to doing what you just said. Because if it breaks this way, and then it breaks this way, and then it's bigger in 72, and then it's shorter and it's 80, then you can't ever sequence it appropriately like you're wanting to do. So yeah, some of those things kind of, and that's probably, not probably, it definitely is what some of those younger players who are using ball flight analytics, we're just looking at it as in like, can you repeat your arm slot? On our TrackMan unit, we've got data to suggest, you're like, well, you throw your fastball here, and then you throw your slider here, and then you throw your changeup like down here, like, so these ball flight analytics, these release, metrics, all of those things, or there's elements of it, I guess, that's probably more important, and again, like, it kind of all backtracks. You're not going to expect the movement of your pitch to be consistent, until your execution of the pitch, until your movement of the pitch is good. And you're not going to expect the movement of your pitch to be good until your release of the pitch can be good. Back that up a step further. We're probably not going to expect your release to be any good until your ball mechanics, your pitching mechanics are consistent and repeatable. And we're probably not going to expect your pitching mechanics to be good until your movement and strength and stability capabilities you have a high enough capacity to do it and repeat it, right? Because we were just talking about it at the facility today, actually, like, some of these younger kids who like shoot up 6 inches and they throw 9 miles an hour harder in 1 year. First off, we could talk about this for a long time, but that should be a big red flag for injury purposes. And that's more of what our conversation was about today. Just that, the engine gets built up real big in the car and the frame's not there to support it. It's going to break down. Right.
Amen to that.
But applied to this, that like, the concept is more about like, is the player ready for that next like piece of that progression, and have we taken some of those like initial steps that now that's kind of what we started with here, is that like, some of those pitch design things that get talked a lot about on social media that are on down the line of this chain, like we just really can't expect to have too many high level conversations like that until we've filled these other buckets. But ball flight analytics and everything a TrackMan unit gives us still kind of helps us, that first and foremost, we're probably looking more at like release metrics, and then we're probably looking more at like, consistency of shapes, you know?
Right.
And then we're looking at, well, how do we, like, you're not going to try to make a player's slider better if he can't throw the slider same way 2 times in a row.
Right.
What are you even doing? Like, let's just nail something down first, and then as you nail something down, then we can start to tinker. Because if I can't repeat the same arm slot, whether it's a mechanical breakdown thing, maybe it's a performance breakdown thing, like we said, a mechanical breakdown thing, or even just like a release point thing, we're not going to start trying to like switch grips or do anything different with the pitch before we can even repeat a pitch, if that makes sense. So even on a TrackMan report for a 14-year-old, and say it's an advanced 14-year-old for a second, say it's that 89 mile an hour 15-year-old, 14-year-old that's like way ahead of his class, like he's still going to have like some movement pattern things there because he grew so much that, 89 might suggest that there's other people that throw 89 that we might work all day on throwing a better slider, but it's because they've kind of got those buckets filled, right? So even within ball flight analytics and some of this huge in-depth information that we have, we get these huge like page-long reports for one bullpen session. There might be one little bitty section that we're looking at during this month of the year for this particular player. And most of the
because
time,
he may not be prepared for everything else just yet.
Yes. And I would even go as far to say is like most of the time, that's probably all you're looking at, no matter the age of the player, but you're, meaning a small section of it.
Sure.
You're kind of doing it in that same order that like, okay, now think about the 32-year-old major league guy that comes through. Well, he can repeat his release point and he can make consistent shapes. Well, how are we improving it or sequencing it, right? Well, we still can't even really have that conversation. It's kind of like you have to check those kind of buckets. Now the 32-year-old guys probably check those buckets, but if we got into the scenario where it's like, okay, and we're talking about, making your slider better, and then a coach does have these other layers of like, well, man, you're not even repeating release point on it yet. Why don't we get to there first? So even within a big report like that might seem like, holy cow, all this stuff, and maybe a lot of it's fluff, maybe it's not, like, it still kind of works in a very intentional, like,
still got to go back to bucket 1.
Amen. And then we have time to talk about bucket 7 after the 6 are filled, but you're still going to probably look back at bucket 3 when you're looking at bucket 7 and make sure that that's like filled to capacity before we ever start talking about all this crazy in-depth stuff with Edgertronic cameras and whatever after that,
Right.
And most of the time, most of those players have things they can do better in those initial buckets that just by doing those things better are going to improve bucket 7, which is probably lost on some people. So
I want to ask you about the velocity consistency, because we look at that, monitor your pitch speed to assess whether fatigue or inefficiency is affecting your throws. Now, I may be a little archaic. It's okay. But what's curious to me, and I understand, I'm sure I get it. You're talking about velocity consistency, how hard you can throw the ball, consistency until fatigue or inefficiency or whatever comes into play. And maybe this is, a bad place to, I don't know, but it's curious to me. And I always think about this because, just even so we've gone away from almost changing speeds other than if we're throwing a different pitch. Mm-hmm. Even with our fastball.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah, amen. Yeah. I mean, the way I got taught to pitch when I was younger is that, variations of your pitch is a good thing. And I think that, we don't really teach that anymore because a lot of different things, like within the game, at the major league level, like most starters just like aren't really trying to turn the lineup 3 times over anymore.
Right.
The definition of success has just changed from what that is. We're not trying to run guys out there for 250 innings a year, right? So it's more of like sprint while you got the ball and be the best you can be for as long as you can give me, and then I'm gonna give it to the next guy. That's just kind of how we've. I mean, it's not me. It's not like
no.
Coach,
I get
it's
it.
Not whatever. It's kind of just what the game's deemed as success for the pitcher. So
because that was interesting to me because that's kind of my thought process. Because used to, you change speed on your fastball 3 to 5 miles an hour just by a grip a little deeper in the palm.
Yep, no doubt.
Right.
Spread your fingers out, take it out in your fingertips, put it in your palm. We used to talk about having like B fastballs because when you knew it wasn't swinging, it's easier for you to throw a strike. Just throw a B fastball. Now, I think a lot of a lot of data, that comes out about you that shows that you do that, and people start swinging more now on 2-0-3-1 pitches, especially if I'm labeled as a strike thrower and I get in the 2-0 count, then you got a pretty good idea that I'm about to strike because I just threw 2 balls. So statistics say, right?
Right.
But I think more of what we were trying to drive home with that, okay? And I love that that's the way that you took that, because I know that everybody reads these and takes it maybe in a slightly different way.
Sure.
Velocity, consistency. Hear me out on this for a second, okay? The first thing that happens most of the time, I'd like to say,
sorry,
it's all right. Put them on mute. Maybe answer it. Maybe people want to hear it.
Exactly.
Maybe the concept here too is better applied to like training atmospheres. Okay, but I would maybe say and argue is that like even you're supposed to pitch on Friday. Wednesday while you're at practice as a pitcher, like that's still a training atmosphere in my mind. Like you're still going through like a training program.
Sure.
Even in between starts is training. But even within the games, I think you can monitor and use this. What typically happens before injuries is there's a decrease in performance.
Makes sense.
Okay, there's a decrease in performance. Now, I think there's two different sides of that. You can talk about that in like more of a macro view or more of a micro view. Okay, so from a micro view, we'll start here and zoom out. From a micro view, the way that we're going to use this is that if you're in a training day, a particular day, it's Friday, January 20th, okay? And you're set to have, all these, arm care drills and plyo drills and weighted balls, right? And like long toss and your compression or pull down throws or a bullpen day or whatever, right? We use the radar gun, right? That as we're trying to create the safest environment to train for velocity during appropriate months of the year, after appropriate on-ramps and things have been done, and after appropriate initial buckets have been filled. It's very intentional, it's not just print it out off the internet and do week 4 because it says do week 4, that when you go to do that in one specific day, okay, we monitor them on the radar gun. And if it says that you're supposed to throw, hypothetically call it 10 to 15 compression throws, and on throw number 7, your velocity starts to decrease, you're done right there.
Wow.
Okay. Because the velocity goes down.
Right.
So you're obviously fatigued. The reason that the velocity would go down is because of fatigue. Fatigue leads to injuries. So we use the radar gun like that from a consistency standpoint.
Okay.
Take the same thing in a game, right? The guy's normally, 90, 93. Well, he comes out today and he's 88 to 91. Why is that? Because of fatigue.
You hear that. That's what you're hearing.
Because of fatigue.
Yeah.
Whether it's inflammation, whether he like really feels it, his central nervous system feels it. I'll tell you that. If he's 88 to 91 and his average fastball's been 91 plus, then something's going on fatigue-wise with that athlete. And holy cow, it could be for a million different reasons. He didn't sleep good. Girlfriend broke up with him the night before. Bus travel trips. Lack of hydration, lack of nutrition, lack of supplementation. Had a big test. Holy cow, there's a ton of things. But if we're using velocity consistency to be our guide and our tool on how's this fatigue, well, the only reason that this player's performance would be down is because of fatigue. Okay. If like we're filling the buckets of in-season strength, like because you could also maybe look at and examine their whole monthly calendar of like, well, have we been keeping up with our arm care? Have we been keeping up with, our lifts, and have we been doing all of those things? Because you could also say or suggest that like, well, maybe his just average velocity is decreasing because he's not as strong as he was 2 months ago, right? Which would still be an issue and
red flag, right?
Well, and from velocity consistency, you would still use that as like your tip of your spear to then start to backtrack of like, well, why? Those would be the questions you would ask after the radar gun went down.
Right? I was way over in the South 40, wasn't I?
Well, yeah, but it's good though. It's not wrong. I think it's but it's still true.
Yeah, but to the point of what you're doing, and I think that's the interesting thing here. Me looking at this, see. This really is a completely different metric than what my mind was thinking about looking at that.
Yeah. Less from pitch to pitch and more of like using it as a tool to help us assess whether fatigue or inefficiency is affecting your throws.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
that makes a lot of sense too.
Well, I think from what you're saying or suggesting though is that like I do think you have to have some wisdom as the coach or the pitching coach there to like maybe see or understand, you know, within an at bat, maybe it
Right.
fluctuates, but like, if normally I'm 90 93 and today I'm 87 to 91, that to me would be the velocity inconsistency, right? If you're within an at bat and I threw 87 and then it was 1-2 and I threw one at the top of the zone, I was 93. That's not quite what I'm saying or suggesting.
Right.
And I still think that could be valuable, but
it's a curious thing too in this, because I remember, I'm watching down the stretch in the playoffs and whatnot, and let's pull out Jack Flaherty.
Yeah.
Okay. Jack Flaherty on, I think it was 6 days rest, is throwing 96, 97, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But his fastball was consistently 95, somewhere in there. He goes less, 92, 93. But I don't know if that's injury. I don't know if that plays into what you're talking about. How are you assessing? Is that kind of the thought process?
Yeah, I don't think that you're using it in that sense though.
Okay.
It's like, oh my God, we got to get him out of the game. I think you still kind of talk with him. I think you still kind of monitor with it. I think that, with less rest, you would just expect like more fatigue or
Right.
less recovery time, I think is more of the, the better way to view that.
And so that gives you an idea of, we cannot pitch this guy on 4 days rest, period. It doesn't work.
Well, yeah, I think you're probably weighing your risk versus reward for all of it, in the playoffs and get into a certain game. And
I know I'm talking big stuff, but it's curious.
Yeah. Like, I mean, this circumstance is going to come up this June, like there's going to be a high school kid, that pitched in his semifinal game 2 days ago, or, quarterfinal game 2 days ago. And we need him for an inning or two to get to a semifinal game to make it to state at all, and yeah, I mean, a lot of kids are going to go out and do that are seniors in high school that, one, may never play baseball again, but two, like, care more about in the short term winning a state championship than what that might do to them for their college career. And three, like, some people are just like, give me the ball and I'm not thinking about any of that. And that's like, that's cool. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. I did it.
Yeah.
I did it. I didn't get injured. There's no real thing that would say that you're gonna get injured, like, for sure, if you do that. It's just that it's the percentage chance of risk that you might, and then you personally as the player, and should be as the coach, weighing, is that like risk versus the reward, is that risk worth the reward? So yeah, I mean, those velocity, that's how we would use more of the radar gun velocities to help determine, should we progress or regress, in stages or recovery kind of techniques. So
I took you way out in the South.
No, yeah, it's all good. I think it's good though, because people certainly read it that way. So to talk about it is good.
To me, again, I'm not, from the last time we were doing pitching and all that stuff, this wasn't part of the conversation.
Yeah.
As far as when my son was younger, he got into college and things and whatnot. Yes.
Yep.
But, when he was 10, 11, 12, 14, it wasn't as much.
Yeah. When the whole reason, truthfully, of like why I like to do this and maybe talk about things like this is because the sweet spot on any of this, like, there's so many people in the world that have a TrackMan. I think that there's very, very few people. I mean, you can go buy any of the tools that we have.
Yeah,
go ahead,
you can buy.
go try it. Go do it.
You can buy a Rapsodo.
Yeah, you can buy any of it. The sweet spot, I think, in maybe what we do or how our staff goes about doing any of this is it's all about like the implementation of that, right?
Yes.
You asked me before this if I think ball flight analytics is getting maybe a little too involved in our younger players' lives. And my general answer to that would be like, yes. It's our own fault because we're putting it up on TV, and then it's all over social media, and everybody that's like my business is trying to say, oh, look what we do with ball flight analytics, so yeah, I think there's a fundamental flaw in understanding maybe how they fit into the big picture and some of those things I was talking about earlier, how they get used for certain players based off of their, biological age or their training age. But the sweet spot always with any of these tools or any process really in general is it going to be about how you implement it and make it make sense and actually turn into not just better performance on the field, but better outcomes on the field, because what I mean by that is like better performance on the field would mean, I'm throwing faster, running faster, hitting harder. Well, like none of that matters if I'm not hitting for a higher average, driving in more runs, winning more games, throwing more strikes, winning more games. Like that's what we care about, like for our players. And I think trying to connect as many of those dots. Now, the way our business goes about doing that for people, because we're not on-field coaches, is by helping them, improve their performance metrics, because that gives them a better capability to go out on the field and apply it to the game and be better. That's what my business is resolved around. We're not on-field coaches. We're not. We try to integrate, and we try to help teach and educate, because all of us are baseball guys first and foremost, that I've lived it and done it and experienced it myself. But if there's better ways or strategies we can help do that from the gym all the way out into the field, like that's what we're aiming to do. So that's the whole point of any of the ball flight analytics, or maybe to answer your question about how it impacts.
And I think that's the key to any of this, because we're out a lot. We see the kids, and from the time I think it's been the time since the 12, 13, 14, man, did you see that curveball? Yes. I don't think it was a curveball. It's called gravity.
Yeah, that's right. It's a spinny dropping ball.
And that's okay. And you know what? In one respect, that's okay. That's 12U, it's 13U, it's 11U. Some kid's throwing this curveball. And if it gets the guy out, who cares if it's gravity that's making it work? I really don't care.
Yeah.
But understand, when you get to these things, and TrackMan, at that age level is not a factor in that.
No,
and that's kind of what you're getting at, right?
Yeah. I mean, and at the end of the day, like, it's very intentional that we don't use a TrackMan or Rapsoda with our 12-year-olds, because it's just not where they're at in this overall progression, that it's just not really that. There's bigger fish to fry. There's bigger buckets to fill, for those kids and players. And one of them being like enjoying the game, like having fun, and building a love for the game. So when it gets grindy, and when it gets harder, and when it gets more challenging when they get older, they've got such a deep love for the game that they want to figure it out. They have that want to that we were talking about earlier, that that's instilled in them in very young ages.
Great conversation, and we were talking about it before we started, and we've got the player spotlights all coming up. And one that was really interesting to me was Mason Shermer. Enjoy talking to Mason anyway, but to your point, the grind. He talked about this, and watch it. I'm giving you a little tease, but he was always heavier, whatnot. And somebody told him, said, look, you want to go and be at this next level, you've got to get yourself in shape.
Yep.
And he told the story of what he had to do. So I go watch that, and the level of commitment that it took.
Yeah.
But it's because he wants
to. Yep. He loved it. He wanted it. And I mean, anytime you're driven by love, you're just gonna, persevere like a little bit more, for sure, in that love for the game. And that's, I mean, so there's just bigger buckets to fill, I think, for those 12U guys that ball flight analytics aren't entirely important for them. Can we use it as a tool? Can it be fun for them to look up at something and compete with, because it's actually got a strike zone on it? Like, you can use elements of it that are more applicable to that training age, but for those analytics, I think there's just bigger buckets to fill for those kids that being athletic throwers, building general strength and stability, building a competency of like what weight room movements even are, like a push, pull, squat, hinge, and overall better body coordination, so that when they get into an age where they're starting to talk about a little bit higher level like things or concepts or whatever, they've just got better body control and body awareness to actually do some of the things we ask them to do as coaches, trying to expedite that learning curve, first and foremost mentally, no doubt about that, but then also like secondarily, like physically for them too, so all those things can fit and be applied in different areas. And we try to do our best with the different age demographics. And when you start parceling people out by ages, though, you have very different skill level 12-year-olds, I think, which is what it can be the challenge in an environment like that.
One last thing. I think it's interesting what you said earlier. You talked about the kid that grew 6 inches, and this and that. And so foundations become very important, the buckets, making sure you fill them. Because here you're talking about high level stuff here, But unless that kid right there, and I think this is sometimes, you talk about reward and risk and injury and things. And I think to me, those are one of the things, especially with the younger kids, he's 14 or 15, even at that age, um, you get that kid and he pops 89 miles an hour because he grew and he's bigger, just that. But yet, is he really in that space to throw 89 miles per hour yet?
Consistently. Yeah.
Or even 85.
Yeah.
And where is he comfortable in his body at that point? And I think sometimes we push that kid who shot up and all of a sudden, boom, hits that big number and everybody's excited. I'm like, yeah. Okay, that's cool. And it is exciting, but to pump the brakes and come back to bucket one is the difficult thing, right?
Fill that bucket, amen. And then also, holy cow, that kid is also probably their 3-hitter and shortstop and point guard. And you know what I mean? Like, think about how many other things we push that kid to go do.
Yes.
Where he's not pitching and now he's playing shortstop. And when he's playing shortstop and they got to do a double cut, the coach is probably telling that guy, well, you need to be the guy catching the ball so you can throw him out at home. And like, I don't know, all of these different like crazy things. And then also those kids, if their parents and them are like really actively going to all these different showcases because now they got a new shiny toy and they want to go show it off in front of like people and get the recognition and get the scholarship and get the stuff that they've been working for. And we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. That's where those like breakdowns in it, in the inefficiencies like kind of start to occur where, it's like, it takes a huge like dose of humble pie, no doubt, to be like, okay, I can do this.
Yes.
And I understand that I can, and other people understand that I can, but I need to take a mature approach here that like, ultimately my biggest goal is that by the time when I'm a senior, I've improved from now. I've, got the health and longevity to continue to do this for as long as, I want to, or I can, and, not doing something at age 14 or 15 in an environment like that where you shot up so much. Really just probably because of genetics. You probably had the capabilities and like your arm path and all those things to do it, all along, but now I guess it looks cooler and feels cooler that it's 89 and not, 79 when you were 12 or, whatever the case may be, that it's just closer to, major league caliber pitching velocity. That's cool. I've lived it. I understand it totally, but having the wherewithal to, whether you decided to do this or you trust your coach enough to decide like to help you do this, but to like keep the general workload in check, to fill the initial buckets, to help sustain and maintain like those gains. I said it earlier, but it's like having the engine in the car with like a ratty frame, like the frame's just not ready to handle the race car yet,
Right.
So like taking the time to kind of build some of those initial buckets up before you think that, well, I just throw 89. Well, because I throw 89, I need to really be working on a tight slider now too. It's like, okay, like, yeah, we can probably start to talk about more of those things because of the overall idea of like where your progression is at. But I'm talking more about building a solid base so that we have more days throughout the year where we can safely and in a healthy manner, throw with a higher velocity or throw with more intent. I don't care about the velocity, just throw with a higher intent. So now we have more opportunity for reps while we're on the mound to actually work on a slider. You see how we get to that progression now. It's by building a strong foundation, not just being like, oh, okay, 89, let's do XYZ. It's like, okay, well, there's a little bit maybe more that goes into it. So.
And listen, folks, at 14 and 15, if you're throwing 80, 81, you're still going to get a lot of people out.
Hey, I did. Seriously. Everybody. True. Yeah, I threw 80 when I was 14. Like I threw 84 when I was, a freshman. And then I grew a little bit and I jumped up and started throwing 90. But like, I tell people this all the time, kind of laugh. Like I threw 1 inning as a freshman in high school. And then I probably threw 20. And I played up, on my summer team, and I played, varsity as a sophomore, but like I wasn't a pitcher yet,
Yeah.
I went on my summer team and played on an 18U summer team when I was 15, but I didn't pitch.
Right.
I didn't pitch.
Right.
And then when I was 17, I started pitching it quite a bit more. And then I was 18, I pitched all the time, so like slow down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Slow down. I think I kind of came by it organically in that environment where like I just was not a pitcher yet, so I wasn't trying to do both, that like if I was, or I viewed myself that way, or if my dad viewed myself that way, or if my coach viewed myself that way, then you'd start to run into like more problems. I organically came by that where it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't throwing a whole lot of like, wasn't doing like velocity training, and I wasn't doing all this because I just like wasn't really a pitcher yet, but yeah, I mean, you don't have to be in such a rush to do all those things to get to where you want to go, that it's way better. I mean, come on, it's tried and true, slow and steady like wins the race, slow and steady wins the race, and like doing things incrementally. We were just going over it today. We've got velocity increases that we saw and we're analyzing from our high school population of players this year, and studies to say or suggest that between 3 and 4 miles an hour a year is a healthy amount for a high school player to gain velocity. And if you're above that, it should probably spark a red flag of like the engine on the bad frame conversation. And if you're below that, then we probably need to look at like some more performance-based like metrics of like why you're not doing that, because there's a lot of people, unfortunately, that like do what we do that, will tout, oh, this kid gained 14 miles an hour in 1 year. First off, I read something like that because I know better now. I'm like, holy cow, bing, 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 like red light, that's not good. Something like that kid better be filling some of these buckets, or, there might be big problems, right? But also that like, holy cow, like, if you grew 6 inches and gained 40 pounds because of puberty, that had nothing to do with me as a coach. How am I taking credit for that,
Right.
So
because the kid's testosterone started working.
like huge. And that was the biggest driving force in their thing, not any drills that you were doing. Now you still try to like help those players and like give them process oriented like goals that say like, well, yeah, you jumped this and then you jumped that. But like, yeah, I mean, that's, you can't base your decision making, I think, off of, data like that, because at 16 years old, more than likely they could sit on the couch all year, all winter, and come out and throw harder than what they threw last year, simply just because they grew 3 inches and gained 15 pounds naturally, or play basketball all off season, don't pick up a baseball at all. I mean, I would do that. Okay, now like I played quarterback, so I was getting like definitely like some throwing fitness stuff from throwing a football. Sure. So it's a little maybe distorted as somebody who played a different position or played a different sport, right? But like I've told you before, like none of this like really existed. Like I lifted with the football team. I played baseball during baseball season. I played football during football season. And like I would show up to do my like pitching stuff in January or whatever, December. Like, and I lifted all winter, like I worked hard. But yeah. But very different than how we go about things these days with players. And yeah, every single year I'd gain 5 miles an hour, like just by now, like I said, maybe a little distorted because throwing the football. Like I do think that like had some benefits from my arm all fall. I wasn't just not throwing. But hypothetically, I'm saying or suggesting that I think there's a lot of 16-year-old kids who could just be playing basketball all winter, and just throw harder just because they, were doing, and I'm saying playing basketball instead of just like, I don't really mean just like sitting on the couch, because if you sit on a couch and eat potato chips, like you're gonna get fat and probably like lose mobility, and you're probably gonna like, what I'm saying, like sure. So somebody that's generally active or playing a different sport or whatever and not throwing at all, maybe you're just lifting hypothetically, you're probably gonna just show up to the first day of tryouts and throw harder than what you threw last year because you're just 4 inches bigger, or whatever. Even if you only grew 1.5 inches, like you're 1.5 inches bigger and you gain 15 pounds, So kind of claiming success of that, I think can be faulty. Obviously, what we're trying to do is like, the players like growing. So we're trying to build support and parameters around that, and then also give them nuggets. What I'd love to see is like a control group. You'd never get to do this because no players would ever give this time up of training, right? But have a control group of 10, 16-year-olds who just played basketball all off season, and then 10, 16-year-olds who trained at P3, and see which ones like how much better which one's got, right? Like, because this control group is probably still going to get better minimally, just because of the nature of, puberty, right? Sure. And testosterone and all those things for young kids, young boys. And, but then actually see, well, how much better could I have gotten if I was doing a training program or approach like this? That would be very interesting.
You might be able to get a grant for that, bro.
Need some people to give up their time, give up their youth. No, I'm just kidding. All right, well, thank you guys for checking out this video. If you like it, Give us a thumbs up, drop us a comment, any questions you have. Would love to answer them. Any future topics you guys would like us to talk about or expand on. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you next time.